Okay. Hey.
Hey, how are you doing, Nola?
Hey. Oh gosh, this is so much fun. I'm so glad that we decided to do this, and I hope that we get some folks that are going to watch us live as we
Me
talk
too.
about all that goes into making an audiobook. If they don't get to watch it live, there will be the ability to replay it. So hopefully some folks will tune in. For folks who are going to be tuning in live with us, just a reminder, you guys can put comments in the comment box and Mike and I will take a look at those. Hey, Deborah King is here. Hey, Deborah.
Hey, nice to see you, Deborah.
Oh gosh, I haven't
Hey.
seen Deborah live in a long time. It's been so long since we've been doing live shows that I miss seeing Deborah King's name pop up there. Hey, girl. Hey, girl.
Right? It's nice
Welcome
to
to
be
the
alive for
show.
a
I
while.
love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So, Mike, you and I wanted to get together. I love that this is actually your idea to get together and talk about the creation of the audiobook that we worked on together. So, the book that we're talking about is Traveler.
Yay, Traveler.
And it's really exciting to be talking about Traveler right now because we've got Watcher coming out. The sequel will be coming out in November. So if you've not read Traveler, this is a great time to do it. And if you go, I just don't have time to read, what you do have time for is sitting in the car, or you're cleaning your house and you got, need something in your
Yes.
ears. Well, let's put Mike Eberhardt's voice in your ears and get you a copy of Traveler on audiobook so that you can listen to Traveler and get that in before Watcher comes out and be all ready to go in November. It's perfect.
I love audiobooks for that. I listen to audiobooks when I'm doing laundry, when I'm putting away the dishes, just kind of normal choresy stuff, or driving, like you said. It's so handy.
Mm-hmm.
It lets me catch up on stuff when I don't have time to read.
Yeah. And I've listened to a few of yours that you've done. So it's kind of like, all right, let's go for a drive, Mike. And so we go for a drive.
All right, come on, hang out. Let's go.
It's like, oh, Mike's just going to tell me stories while I drive. I love it. It's great.
Well, I think this is such a unique opportunity because we're really on both sides of this book. Mm-hmm. You wrote the book and then I narrated the book. And we have very different, like that artistic process, I'm sure, is different for both of us. It'll be interesting to see, what we do that's the same.
Yes.
That's fun.
My printer is over here making all kinds of, hold on, my printer's making like it's trying to print something.
Oh, wow.
I didn't send anything to my printer. Like,
it's all
Sarah is
sending.
Yes, it's just fan mail coming in.
We'll have to check our fan mail.
I don't know what's happening, but that's that
imagine?
weird sound back there. So the printer decided it's just going to do all kinds of things without me. That's funny. So yeah, we're on both sides of the book. So it's interesting for me to now hear, like actually hear what I've been hearing in my own head as I've been working on this. So when you write a book in your head, the characters sound a certain way and, you kind of hear their voices or they're your own voice. I mean, different writers are different things. I tend to kind of give them their own voices, but then you and I are both theater people. I mean, we grew up on stage doing theater. And so I think it just, even that kind of makes us think about them differently, and we give them those characters, we give them those mannerisms, even if they're not written into the book, we're going to be kind of envisioning that. Absolutely. And so for me, it's like they all have their different voices or have their different ways of talking. It was so fun to actually get to hear them, like actually hear these people. It's like they suddenly came to life, and that's just so fun. What was it like for you? Now, we've talked before that you don't read the book ahead of time. You actually do it chapter by chapter.
Yes, I do. So I don't read the book ahead of time. And so I don't know if you remember when we first started working on Traveler, we had that phone call. I kind of interviewed you and I typed up a whole 2 pages worth of notes on the characters. So what I like to do, and the reason I do is because I'm from the theater, and theater is big and huge and you have to telegraph everything. Yeah. And so when I first started out, I would telegraph a lot and you could tell who the villain was and what was happening. And I wanted to prevent that. And so that's why I don't read ahead, because I don't want to know who's going to betray who, what the big surprise is, what the twist is. I want to be taken on that journey as the reader is. And so for me, preparing something like this with all these characters, there's so many characters and different accents in this book. What I'd like to do is read the first 3 or 4 chapters to get a feel for the book, talk to the author, ask them about the characters in particular, and then kind of develop them from there. And something I do that's kind of crazy that I haven't really heard of anybody else doing is I'll create 2 or 3 different versions of a character voice, and then I will
Oh, I love
mix
that.
and match in a scene and listen to it to see who goes well together, who really stands out, what's not a good fit, who gets annoying over time, and kind of cast it like a casting agency, just listening to the voices. And so I did like 3 or 4 versions of Shelby, a couple of different versions of Benny. These are all the main characters for those who don't
Yeah.
know the book, and kind of picked and chose what I thought would really stand out so that when you, because as a listener, it's really hard to
Mhm.
tell who's talking in some of these audiobooks. I've listened to some where I
Yeah.
can't really tell who is who, what's going on. And so I wanted to make it very distinct. So people, as soon as they hear it click in, they go, oh, that's Shelby. Or, oh, you know, that's Benny. That's what I'm
Mhm.
really looking for, which is really fun. I'm hoping that translated.
Oh, it did, and that was you and I talked about this the other day when I told you, I said it's very clearly Benny. In my head, a lot of the accents were very muted, because I'm writing too many people, I'm jumping back and forth. But because they're from all over the world. All of these characters have lots of different accents. And so
Yes.
to know who's talking, especially when you get all of those accents, it's, to have that accent be very distinct. I mean, even if they may not normally have had an accent that was quite as pronounced, it
Yeah.
helps in the audiobook because you know very quickly who is talking before you get to the, Benny exclaimed, or that's a heavy Italian accent, that's Benny because he's Roman.
Yes.
It's like that's Benny talking,
Yes,
so
absolutely.
you got to have those. You got to have those. And everybody has their own way of talking too. And I think you gave them that, their own kind of cadence or their own, just the way that their words are formed. How do you some of the ones that have either something that's more pronounced in the way that they actually talk, I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have those ways of talking naturally. Just when you talk, you just sound like
Right.
Mike, but
Right.
you've
This
got to
was
make other
me.
people sound like other things. So you've got some tips
Yes.
and tricks for how to do that, though.
Yeah, for sure. My regular voice is really boring, as you can hear.
It's not.
And so it's always funny for me to hear the narration voice and then all the characters. So there's lots of things I do preparing stuff like this because I don't speak any other languages. So I go online and I learn the accent. So when you told me, oh, you're going to be going over, you're going to do an Egyptian accent, you're going to do a Greece
You're like, oh
accent, you're
God,
going to do
no.
French, you're going to do Spanish, you're going to do Italian. Yeah, I was like, oh boy, here we go. And so what I like to do is I'll go onto YouTube and I'll listen to, there's people, accent coaches out there. They've got some videos how to do it, take some notes. But then the weird thing I do is I'll go on Netflix or on YouTube and I'll type in the accent I'm looking for and like the word soap opera or television show. And I'll watch shows in the native language and not know what the
That's
heck they're talking
fun.
about. But it gets that kind of cadence and that rhythm.
Yeah.
You start to hear, is it faster? Is it slower? Is it sing-songy? Is it more monotone? And just kind of go from there. And then I just experiment and practice and practice. And sometimes I can hold the accent for a long time. Like the Italian accent sticks around for me, or French. I did an Australian accent in a book. I swear that's the hardest accent I've ever had to do. And now I just sound like a
Tricky.
really awful Cockney person when I try to sound like an Australian. It's so bad. But I do that kind of prep work. And when I want to give the voices some distinguishing features, and as a vocalist, you can go, you remember from theater, you can go higher or lower in pitch, right? So you can make it a
Mhm.
high voice, you can make it a low voice. You can add some texture to make it sound kind of gruff, like you get that throaty sound in there. Um, trying to find those different nuances. A lot of times I'll play with my mouth. I'll change the way my lips are, or I'll put something in my mouth. When I voiced Apollo in this one, I did his voice with a baby carrot in my mouth. And I
Oh,
held it,
that's wild.
yeah, I held it between my back teeth. And the reason is it keeps my jaw a little bit more extended. It gives a little more resonance, a little more
Mhm.
power to the sound. And then it gives a bit of an affectation on certain words and certain syllables that
Mhm.
makes it definitely not sound like I'm talking. It
Yeah.
sounds like, somebody else. And so those are some of the tricks I'll do. And it makes a big difference. It really helps kind of distinguish between the characters, which is fun.
It would be so fun to, like, be watching you like a fly on the wall doing those things, like talking with the baby carrot in your mouth. It's kind of like the Foley artists, where they're doing somebody
Oh my
walking and they've got the
gosh,
little shoes
yes.
on the, or the weird things that they're using to make the sounds. It would be kind
Yes.
of
Oh my
like
gosh,
that.
the things they do are absolutely wild. I bet I look like an insane person when I'm recording this stuff because I'll also do facial expressions to try to, in my mind, my mind's eye, I'm trying to envision who the character is. I'll try to think of like a Hollywood person and never do an impression, but just more of like an energy of that person, or it's something to hold on to visually so that
Mhm.
it kind of can click into that voice, which
I
is
love
fun.
that.
Now,
And
what kind
our
of
commenter
okay.
here, I don't know who our commenter is. Sorry, it just says Facebook user on my end, but whoever you are, clearly knows you and your work well enough to know that this is exactly right. You do immerse yourself in the book until you completely get each character. And as you do, but you're doing it chapter by chapter too, which is, I love that, so that you don't actually project the villain before the villain is revealed and things like that. And it
Yes, I
keeps
gotta tell
it
you.
kind of fresh for you. Are you ever like really surprised? Like, you're reading through, you go, oh God, no, like, oh wow.
Oh my
Or,
gosh,
something that
you know
kind
what?
of like,
That has
oh, I
happened
need
to
to go back
me.
and fix that or change that,
Both of those things
like
have
all the
happened to
time.
me. So I read the
Oh, it's Benny.
chapter.
Hey, Benny.
Hey, Benny, great to see you. Benny, the author of Code Gray, the audiobook I did right before this one.
That's right. Benny
So I
does know
read,
then.
right? He does know. He's worked with me on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I read the chapter that I'm going to record the night before, laying in bed. And I can't tell you how many times in bed I'm like, what? Or no, or like somebody betrays or something horrible happens, and I'm just so shocked. And that emotional reaction, I try to bring that in the next morning when I record. It's very fresh. I sleep on it and I wake up like, I can't believe she betrayed him or whoever, what it is. It's so funny. And then sure enough, sometimes something will be revealed that I didn't know was going to happen earlier, a voice on a telephone or a person who, did something anonymously and I didn't use their character voice because I didn't know it was them. And
Mm.
oftentimes I'll email the author saying, hey, this person is a random voice. Is this anybody I need to be worried about? And sometimes they'll say yes, or sometimes they'll say no. And sometimes they don't remember. And so I'll sometimes have to go back and re-record like, oh, that's supposed to be this guy with this crazy accent. Let me put it in there and go back and fill it in that way. But yeah, it's pretty funny. But I don't know a lot of narrators who actually do that. They all read the books beforehand and go from that place. But for me, I keep that emotion fresh and hot. And I want the reader doesn't know who the bad person is or who's going to
Right.
betray. And the character
You hope they don't
themselves,
anyway.
right, I know, right? And the character themselves don't know that moment when they're going to betray or reveal information. It
Hmm.
just sort of happens organically. And so I really want that to come through and not affect their voice, because he'd be really easy to go, oh, that guy's a real bad guy. I'll give him a deep voice. And I find it so much more disturbing when the plain character that's just around is suddenly the
Yeah.
horrible guy. It reminds me of Breaking Bad when Gus Fring is the villain. He's so mild mannered and
Yeah.
very put together and doesn't seem like a bad guy until you really get to see. And I really like that. So I try to carry that over to the books.
I think it's always better when it's somebody that you don't expect, like
I
even in
agree.
a TV show when they're so, it's kind of like the news things, oh, but he was such a nice guy.
Oh my
Like,
gosh, right? Paid his rent on time, kept to
I
himself, and
mean,
he's the one
just
that
real
murdered 8 people.
quiet, didn't, yeah, it's always the same, and so it's always a little bit more creepy when it's those people, and
Oh my
it's
gosh,
the
for
ones you don't
real.
expect.
Yeah,
And so it's
absolutely.
great when it's the voice has to be the same way because, you're not watching this mild-mannered character on TV that, they're the voice is everything. The voice becomes that character and it has to
Yes.
convey so much. And, I think it's more fun to have an audiobook where the voices are different as opposed to just read. Um, I mean, I will probably at some point, I may record House of Mirrors. I
Oh,
don't
good
see
for
me
you.
doing that one with a whole lot of difference in the voices because that's not my thing. I would struggle with that. As much as I'm a theater person, I don't have the talent that you do for the voices, and it's a little bit more of a kind of a somber book. I mean, I could change voices a little bit, but I don't see me doing a whole lot of it. But for Traveler especially, and
Yeah.
for Watcher coming, and I'm hoping that we get to do the audiobook for Watcher as well, because it's so all over the world, and it's just such a tapestry of accents and voices and people and
It
places.
really
It
is.
makes sense to have someone like you narrate it that can do all of that as opposed to a straight read. And some books, more literary fiction and things like that. Maybe that's more of a straight read. And of course, you could do the same thing. You've got a great narrators, just even your straight voice for commercials and things like that is fantastic.
Thank
But in
you.
this case, what I was really hoping for and you delivered on was that tapestry of characters that you get. It's so different than that straight read.
What I love about putting an accent on these characters and really doing it, because in the book, Shelby isn't really sure who she can trust.
Mhm,
She's in a lot of foreign countries and going back in time and seeing all these sensitive things happen, tragic things sometimes, scary things other times.
mhm.
And an accent feels foreign in like an unsafe way. When as a
Yeah.
listener, you're like, what is that? It's not what you're accustomed to hearing
Mhm.
It's not a regular sing-song. You're like, whoa, can I trust that person? And you don't hear the normal audio cues that you might in your native language or native
Right.
accent. And so I think it adds kind of that air of authenticity to this book, which, by the way, amazing job with all these locations. How
Thank
on
you.
earth did you prepare to write? Because your descriptions are dead on. Like, I would go on YouTube and watch a walk through Greece, and I'd never been to Greece. I don't know anything about Greece. And I would watch a walkthrough, and then I would read what you wrote about and be like, I remember that. I saw that path on there, or I noticed the Parthenon only had these replicas and they were broken. You know, I noticed these little details that you built into the book. How did you do that? What's your preparation look like for something like this?
Well, some of the places I've been to and some of them I haven't. And so it was my goal as I was writing the book that readers would not know which was which. So the
Mm.
preparation for the ones that I had not been to was a lot of watching the videos and looking at lots of details of things that, if you're looking at the Parthenon and the Acropolis in general, you're going to notice a few things, but you may not, there's a whole lot of kind of zooming into specifics that would make it a bit more unique. Like if I was walking around there,
Yeah.
what's going to be in my way? What am I going to be stepping over, walking around, or people
Oh, yeah.
going to be able to see? What parts of it can we access? What parts of it would have been there before that are not there now? And so a whole lot of everything that I had to look at, because everywhere that she goes, she sees in two different time periods.
Oh, that's
So
true.
I had to look at the modern, and then I had to look at the ancient and compare the differences. So whatever she's seeing modern day as she's going through those things, some things would be there, some things would not. Some things would have been added to for the modern, some things would have been missing from the ancient.
Oh, yeah, that's
There's
true.
it had to be a whole lot of deep research for specific things. So if I wanted to look at the Parthenon, and all of those things up there, then details about both time periods becomes critical to separate them and to get it
Yeah.
right, because I definitely didn't want anybody to find the fault in the setting and get distracted from the story, you know.
Yes.
So I did like you. I watched a lot of the kind of walkthroughs and things like that. And then when I would find something that was perfect for the story and something that I wanted to use, if it was a place that I had not been, then it was really drilling down to that place,
Mhm.
that specific thing, and getting, kind of bogged down in details for a while.
I
Just
bet.
so, I mean, even if it was nothing, something as simple as when she ends up at the market, when she first arrives in Cairo and she
Oh,
goes
yeah.
to the market, and there's all the wires, all of the electrical wires and telephone
Oh,
wires
yeah,
that
I
are
remember that.
crisscrossing the top of the market, and it's kind of like this spider web of wires. That was a picture that I had seen of that market, and I'm looking at lots of different pictures of that market,
Oh,
lots of
wow.
different things kind of as you go into that market. And what struck me were all the wires that were crisscrossing up there.
Wow.
And I thought, this is such an ancient structure, and they've built all these modern like bars and shops and things into this very ancient structure, and wires are basically this
That's so
canopy of
crazy.
wires. And to
Wow.
me, that was like a defining feature of it. And so that was
Yeah.
something I wanted to mention, because I thought, if I was walking into that, I immediately would have been looking up going, look at all the wires. Like, oh my God, look at all the wires. But
Yes.
yep. Benny says I don't live far from the Parthenon. Okay, I live not far from Nashville's Parthenon. Let's get that straight, Benny. Yes, I do live not far from the Parthenon, but we have a 2/3 size replica of the Parthenon
Oh, wow,
in
that's
Nashville. It's
interesting.
kind of
That's
cool.
cool.
It's kind of cool. So it is kind of a place, if I was going to look at the Parthenon, I could go, yeah, it looks like this, or it looked like
Oh, that's
this.
fun. You can actually go
Uh,
see. I've actually seen it in the museum in England. That was fascinating when you referenced that. Apollo talks
mhm.
about that. A
Yeah.
part of it got taken to the museum. I'm like, I've been there. I've been to that museum. Now, have you
Yep.
been to any of the places that Shelby goes in this book?
I have actually. Hi, Diane. Thank you for joining us too.
Hi,
Yep,
Dan.
lots of
Welcome.
research. I have been to some of those places. Rome, in particular, I love Rome.
Ooh.
I've been to Ocho Rios, Jamaica. I
Oh,
have done
sure.
the ocean kayaking. I have climbed Dunn's River Falls. All the things that Shelby does at the very beginning of the book. I have done those things. I did get to do that. Rome was definitely one of my favorite places to visit. I thoroughly loved Rome. If I had not been married and
Mhm.
had children back home, I could have just stayed in Rome. I always said, man, another life. I would love
Open a
to be a
gelato
tour
shop
guide
and
in
just
Rome
stay.
and just wander the
Oh,
streets. Like
yes. That'd
that's what
be
I would love
cool.
to do. So I absolutely loved Rome. That was definitely something I put a lot of my own experiences in there when Shelby's talking about, the scooter chicks in their,
I
their
love
little
those little
Vespas.
details that you have. Yes, I love those kinds of details you
All of
really
that
bring
was
in the
things
story.
I experienced. Like the lines on the street are simply suggestions. Crosswalks mean nothing. Like they're painted on the road, but that does not mean you get to walk there. Like it just doesn't. They will run you down. They have places to go, and these girls in their
They're busy.
stiletto heels and their straight skirts and their little hats on their mopeds just flying. Like it's crazy. But all of the things that were those little details about Rome and then the places that she went in Rome were things that I had noticed on the trip, being somebody that was the outsider looking in on Rome, and things that as an American I'm going, oh God, what is happening here? Like I'm mesmerized by the city, but oh God, don't cross the street. Just don't.
That's dangerous. I love
It's
that
so
Shelby's from New
dangerous.
York, and she's like, even she's like taken aback
Yes.
by how it goes.
It's like, no, even at least in New York, the lights change and you can walk. Like that happens, but no, it's not going to happen in Rome. Sorry, you're out of luck.
So now, when you write, Nola, are you a character person first, or are you a plot person? Do you have an idea for a story and you work it around it, or do you have characters that are there and you put them in situations,
I
combo?
kind
How's
of
that work
have
for you?
it's a little bit of both. This particular story came about. Usually there's a catalyst to the plot. There's something that anchors the story. There is kind of that moment where I go, what if? And then it
That's
kind of
fun.
goes from there. And then it's like, so I'm going to take that what if moment and go, who would be the most interesting person to put in that moment?
Oh, wow,
And
that's
so
fun.
then it becomes kind of your main character kind of drops into place there. So this one was I was driving around the more modern part of Franklin. Like Franklin's an old historic town. We love old Franklin. But where the part that I actually live in is more modern. It's the suburb, we got our, big box stores and all of that around in the mall. It's
Yeah,
actually
sure.
driving through all of that. And I'm driving through it and I'm going, I feel a whole lot more comfortable in old Franklin than I do this. Like I've always
Ah,
loved like old movies. I've loved ancient history. I've loved like all of this stuff. Like as much as I can function in a modern world, I feel like it's not really like my place. Like I've always felt better about historical things.
oh,
And so I was
sure.
like, man, what if this is like not when I'm supposed to be? And I'm kind of just looking around at the big things, the big new
Interesting.
things, going, what if I'm supposed to be some other time? How would I know that? And how would I get there? I mean, so it was like this random, like driving through town, sitting in traffic
Oh my gosh, I love now. Is
in
that
this
how the
town.
book idea came? Like, is that what inspired
Yeah.
you to write this book?
Yeah. So then I was like, okay, so if that were to happen to somebody
Mhm.
and they were born in the wrong time, they were born, wrong time, wrong place, something happened and they ended up in the wrong place, how would they get back there? Like,
Wow.
I thought about, all these like destiny books, everybody, these big destiny books, you
Oh,
were
right,
destined
yeah.
for things. Well, it's their life. Like you were born to do it. Right. So you're born to do that.
Yeah.
Well, in that life, you were born to do that. But how do you, what if you
How do you
were
get
born to do something, but that not now,
right.
like some other
Yes.
time you were
Yes.
born to do that. Ooh. So then I thought, if somebody did tell me that I was born in the wrong time and place and I needed to find it, would I be brave enough to do it?
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
that's a whole
would
other
I
question.
actually want to walk away from the life that I have because I needed to be some other time? Would I
Mhm.
want to do that? And then, like, how would I get there? Somebody go and tell me what to do? So it was like I'm not smart enough to figure this out. I'm gonna need help.
Right, of course.
And then, it's like, I don't know that I'm a destiny kind of person either. I don't know that that's me. And
I
so
love
that
how
became
that
Shelby.
carried I love
So
how that
Shelby's
carried
story.
over into the book because
Yeah.
Shelby has those moments where she
Mhm.
considers giving up, where she considers, well, what if I just don't fulfill my destiny? And she says over and over, even when she's talking to the god Apollo, like, I'm not a destiny person. This is not what
Not a
I
destiny
do.
person.
I love that you
Nope.
carried that over into it.
Well, it's so many of the characters that you read about in these big destiny books, they kind of are like, "Oh, great. I have a purpose. And I'm sitting here going, I don't know that I would want that purpose. That's
Right,
a
you're already living your
whole
life,
lot of
like
pressure I'm not sure
yes,
I'm cut
yes.
out for. And so I decided I was going to write this destiny book more from a real person's perspective. Like we all hope that, oh yes, I'll go fulfill my destiny. Are we really
Right,
going
of
to want to
course.
do that?
I know. What if
And,
you don't like your destiny?
hmm,
Yeah.
so I started thinking about it in that way. I was like, Shelby's going to be a whole lot more like me. She'll be a
I love
younger version of me, and in the fact that she won't have all of the the husband and the kids and all these things kind of preventing her from at the point in my life where I came up with the idea I would have had. But if you're young enough that you can follow this,
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean you still want to. And so just because you can doesn't
Right,
mean you
doesn't mean
will.
you're gonna want to. That's true. That's true.
Exactly.
How
And
much did
so
this book change for
that was
you?
Shelby.
Did this book change a lot
How
for
much
you
has it
from your
changed?
first draft to, like, your final product? Did the way it shifted did it shift at all?
I think it did to a certain degree in how it ended. There were changes that I wanted to make to the ending of this one to make sure it could continue on. Like it had to get to a certain point, and it was wrapping around a certain kind of that pivotal moment at the end where she does
Mhm.
have to make the choice.
Yeah.
And there was a whole lot of making sure that that choice was not an easy one for her.
Nice.
And but it was one that by that point she felt empowered to make. Like, and at the Shelby at the beginning didn't feel empowered to make the choice
No,
that
no,
Shelby
not
at
at
the
all,
end
yeah.
made. And so I needed her to change. And so if I ever kind of got to the point where I felt like she wasn't evolving, she was resisting too much, but I also didn't want it to be like she's on this steady trajectory of getting to where she needs to go. There was also moments where it's like, yeah, nope. Like, okay, we
Totally,
don't
yeah,
like
she
what
took
this
steps
was.
backwards and forwards.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
I
sure,
need her
yeah.
to step back. When things start getting real, Shelby's going to step back because that's not who Shelby is. Shelby doesn't do getting real. She's like,
Yes.
no. I'm like, well, I'm gonna need a minute. So
Yeah,
that's more
absolutely.
Shelby. So I did want to make sure, and there was some of that kind of molding that where I made sure that I kind of had those moments for her that the normal just kind of plotting the book out didn't give her those steps back that I felt like were important for her.
You can really feel that character progression as the book goes through. That really does read that 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I noticed as an actor, there were times where me as a person, I'd feel like I'd be really confident here, but she's not confident there. She's not sure. She's horrified by what she's seen or what she's experienced.
Mhm.
And she feels very real that way, which I really like. It's really fun.
Thank you. Thank you. I
And
mean,
kind
it
of,
was important to me that people could feel like they could relate to her because I
mhm.
don't know that everyone would just go, blissfully chasing their destiny. I don't know.
No, 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 who
And,
knows,
and
right?
that was part of it too, was like we want to believe that that's who we are, but are we? And so it was kind of taking that look at myself as I was writing
Mhm.
that, going, I'd love to think that I would. But if I'm honest with myself, would I? And so
Which
Shelby is very much honest with herself. I mean, she's not honest with herself about the way that she feels about Benny.
right, yeah.
She has a hard time coming to grips with that because she's just not an emotional person. She's not an attachment person. She's not a commitment
Right.
person. Like she's not going to do that. And then there's the whole, if I am going to fulfill my destiny, what happens to this? What am I walking away from? And so she's got some walls up about that. But as far as her own abilities are concerned, she's very honest. Like, no, no.
And then for me as an actor, and I don't know if this was intentional, I'm assuming it is, but the way you wrote Benny was very interesting to me because as a character progression, the way I played him, I started him out much more confident, more machismo, more
Hmm.
flirty, and like, hey. And then
Yeah.
like he's the rescuer, he's gonna come save her, and he shows up, he's like, I'm here. But then as he learns what's happening, he becomes
Hmm.
less confident, he becomes
Yeah.
less machismo, less sure. And so I tried to portray him in the beginning very suave and a little
Hmm.
deeper voice. And then as the story progresses, his voice goes up in that register because he's not sure. And is this
Yeah.
a good idea? And what is happening to you? And why am I here? Is that intentional that you
Yeah.
writing him that way?
Yeah, I wanted his development to almost be the opposite of Shelby's and for them to kind of meet in the middle
Hmm.
because he is very confident, very flirty, and she is drawn to him as the one night stand, but she doesn't see him beyond that because of that flirty kind of, he's this hot Roman, oh yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
one night
Totally. Yeah.
stand. That's what he is. That's all he is. And then for them to kind of meet in the middle as her confidence grows and his confidence kind of becomes less flirty confidence as much as it becomes protective of
Yes, for
her. It's
sure.
very
Yeah.
supportive and protective of her. And, she goes,
And they feel almost
she knows what
platonic
she's
during that.
walking into. So,
Yeah.
they need each other at that point.
Yeah.
And that was important for that last, where we get to at the end, that shift and that coming together of those two personalities was very important for that moment to then happen towards the end, where decisions have to be made, and they have to be made for the right reasons.
Hmm.
And where both of them were at the beginning of the book, we're not going to give them the right reasons to make the choices that they make.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of this book when you wrote this first book, Traveler? What's your favorite? What was like the most fun to write?
Oh gosh, I love the playfulness and the kind of the three-way tension we've got going on
Oh, with
between
Gail.
Shelby and Benny and Gail. And
Yes, yes.
Gail is he's super suave, and he's, the sexy French guy. And if it wasn't for Benny, there would have been Gail. It's like
Yes,
he's like,
yes,
oh God, he's so much her type. And
yes.
then they start to get along, like Benny and
Oh,
Gail are
yeah.
getting along, and it's like, what
Yes.
is this?
Yeah, I love that. This is when they're at the restaurant and they're kind of competing, and then they
Yeah,
get
and
along. Or
then
the
all of a
morning
sudden they're
she,
buddies.
yeah, they're friends. I love that morning where she wakes up and they're both in the hotel room and she's
It's
like,
like,
"So what happened last night? Did something happen last night?" It's so funny.
and she knows herself enough to know something might have.
Something might
And
have happened, but I just
might
don't
need to know
remember.
about this. How do we move forward from here? It's kind of the thing. Because yeah, with Shelby, something might have happened. And I mean, she's just a hot mess in so many ways. But that was a lot of fun to write, the three of them kind of dancing around each other and
Yes.
dancing around Shelby. And then she's like left out because they're buddies. But then it's like, it was kind of, that was a fun moment for me. The other thing that was a lot of fun for me to write were the scenes with the Mad King of France.
Oh,
And I
yes.
loved the scenes of the Mad King of France, even though, I mean, because he changes so
He
much
does.
with
Yeah, he does.
each
He's so
flash.
angry in the beginning, and then
Oh
later he's so
gosh.
helpless.
Mhm. And that was really how he was. I mean, he was a historical figure, of course. I mean, and that was a lot of
Oh,
this
fascinating. He's a
is
real person.
yes, he's a real person, and
Wow.
all of the things that we see about him, I put the words in his mouth and set the scene up.
Of
But
course.
historically, these are things, fearing that he was made of glass and he was going to break, and all of these things. Those all
Wow.
that's his history. Catching people on fire at the dance, that the fact that they had to pay
That really
penance to
happened? That
this.
happened?
Yes, it did.
Wow,
So
that's
he was a real
crazy.
person. Those were real
Wow.
things. I just wrote the fictional scene around historical fact. And so I enjoyed that him as a character. And he was, I had a lot of things I could have chosen in
Yeah.
France. There's a
That's a rich
rich,
history.
long history. But for me, I wanted to choose something and someone in a moment in time that might be something different and new for a lot of readers. That this is
Mhm.
not the prominent French history that we hear so much
No,
about.
not at all.
I'm not going to send everybody off to the guillotine. I'm not going to, all of these things that I could have done.
Right.
But I wanted someone that was going to fall into those locations that I wanted, the specific locations in Paris that I wanted, but also was someone different enough that it wasn't like rereading a textbook from school, from world
Yes.
history. And I
Yeah.
tried to do that with a lot of the different places that I chose, all over, even Elijah Faircloth's journey. It was different places, different times, different things, or seen from a different perspective, a different side
Yes.
of it that you might not have really looked at when you were in school. Things that were familiar, places that were familiar, but also maybe a different point in that history. So just to make it interesting. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're reading a history book, and that's
Well,
not what I
otherwise it's
wanted.
so dry. Yeah, you don't want it to be
Mhm.
dry. I love though when some of the characters are getting a little lectury about the history that she's like, "Oh, great, here we go." And like she'll just
Mhm.
make comments and stuff. But the narrator,
Yeah.
well, and it's so funny.
Yep.
The narrator in this book is very fun to play actually, because a lot of times, when I've done this is my 18th audiobook, and when you're doing third person narration, it's often so impartial. It's just very descriptive, like
This one's
this
not.
person went here and this person drank this thing. But yours is like the narrator's like, great job, Rain Man. Like the narrator's making fun of the situation.
Yep.
How did that come about? What made you decide to make I feel like the narrator's a character by himself or herself?
The narrator is also kind of where I find myself. Like, I always say that Shelby
Oh, nice.
Starling is, if Anthony Bourdain was a 20-something chick, that's Shelby Starling.
Oh,
You know,
fantastic.
the
Yes.
snark that goes with that, gonna kind of be jaded about wherever she is, but fall in love with it anyway, very Anthony Bourdain. Solving problems with a bottle of wine and some good food, because this
That
is
solves
how we
all the
approach all of
problems. Like,
life's
just have
problems,
wine and good food, everything is better.
Exactly. So Anthony Bourdain was very much, and that's why the quote from him is the epigraph in the book, is a quote from Anthony Bourdain, because he very much inspired this book, in that character. But then the narrator is kind of me. It's kind
It's
of like,
you.
it's
Nice.
very
That's
much
so
me.
funny.
I mean, if I'm reading it aloud at a book reading or something, it becomes my voice, my intonation, my everything, because to me, I'm like, yeah, great job, Rayman. These are the things that I wouldn't necessarily say out loud to anyone,
Right, but you're
but if
just
I was
thinking them, you're
someone's
like in your
internal
head.
monologue, I
Oh,
could.
that's so funny.
So it's like, what would I say to this person, or what would I be thinking? And that's really what it is. It's not so much what I would say to anyone. So if I'm
Mhm.
thinking through this story, if I'm in my head telling this story, or watching these events, these are the things that I would
Yeah.
say. So a lot of it is, I have to tell what's going on, but at the same time, I don't have to be totally honest, like neutral about it. Like,
Yeah, yeah, you can get judgy with it, which is
I
so
will get a
funny.
little judgy.
You do. It adds a
And
lot of color to the story. It makes it so fun. It's
oh,
really fun.
oh, Benny's got a question for you.
Okay.
Well, now we can see you, Benny. That's good. So do you work on multiple projects at the same time, the way some authors write multiple stories at the same time?
Oh, it's a great question, Benny. The short answer is no. So if I will do commercials while I'm doing an audiobook. I did 2 or 3 banking commercials in the middle of this book. But I never do another audiobook because once I learn, like, teach myself the characters and learn the accents, I just want to get it out. Like, I want to get it on the page is a way to think of it, even though it's like recorded. I want to
Mhm.
get it out of my body and get it produced. So I do not take other projects. And I also do a weird thing too. When I like immerse myself in kind of the genre of whatever I'm doing. So when we're doing Traveler, I watched the only shows I would watch were about time traveling people going back in time and sci-fi stuff. Or when I did Benny's book Code Gray, I only watched detective stories and FBI
Mhm.
stories. And so I get really rigidly locked in to whatever the characters are going to be and what that story is about, just so I can stay in that kind of mood set. I will record commercials because
Mhm.
they're fast. I can spend an hour on a commercial
Yeah.
and then you're done. Whereas an audiobook, this is an 80 to 100-hour project to complete a book.
That's so
And so it's a
long.
huge commitment. And so, yeah, I don't dabble in anything other than that. Great question,
That
Benny.
that is a great question. That's a very good question. That is
Yeah.
very, very good. And that's 80 to 100 hours of work. I mean, that was another thing I was going to ask. How long does this take you to do this? I mean, as you're sitting down at the computer and you're doing the recording, I know there's so many hours of research and finding the voices and testing the voices and all of that. How many hours can you, and it's got to be exhausting, just on your
You know,
jaw, if nothing else, all that talking and manipulating and all the things that you have to do to get those voices right. How long can you actually spend at a time, sitting there and doing that? I mean, I know if I sit down and start writing for a couple of hours, if I don't get up, I mean, I'm elderly now. Everything is going to like lock up, and my feet are going to go to sleep, and what's falling on my face when I stand up. I mean,
yeah.
I can only sit for so long at a stint, even if the words are just flowing. Just
Yeah.
physically, it's a hard thing to do. But you're even more physically invested than I am sitting at a
I am.
keyboard.
So the actual recording part of it, I think, is the smallest part of the work that I do, the part in the booth. Since I am a theater performer, as you were, um, I'm used to being on the spot and performing live. And so usually when you hear my reads, that's my first take.
I love
Sometimes
that.
it'll be a second take if I mess up, but usually it's the first time I've sat down to actually record it. Of course, not the character work and the practice stuff in the front. But of course, this sounds crazy, but I have to pause a lot because an airplane went over my head, or a train went, or my neighbor's car alarm is going off, or my dog needs me. And so, you'll wait for that, and then you kind of try to get right back into it. Um,
Mhm.
but the amount of time it takes. So I do the research on the characters. I learn the accent. I create several versions, and I do the mismatches to find out who I'm going to cast as the voice. And then I kind of just sit down and I'll record it. Let's say it's a chapter is an hour long. That will
Mhm.
probably take me about 2 hours to record, just because I'm having to pause. And since I do my own editing, Here's another crazy thing that I do. You ready for this? Oh, I see
Oh, yeah.
Deborah's my students have superpowers. I tried recording my own audiobook. I learned a lot about my limitations. Wow, isn't that true? I learned a lot about my limitations too.
I mean,
But
I've only tried to do very short things because you and I talked about, doing some audio
yeah.
work and things like that. And I've done some short things. I'm going, yep, I know my limitations too. I'm going to start working with those if I'm going to get any
Yeah.
audiobooks out.
And so for
So
me, I'll
what
go
is it that
in.
you do that you were going to tell me about that you do the weird thing that you do?
Oh gosh, so many things. What was I gonna? I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. But
If it
I'll have to
takes
think about.
an
Oh,
hour
here it is.
takes a chapter takes an hour, 2 hours is
Yeah.
other
So
stuff.
since I do my own editing, I learned very early on that you hear my breaths, right? Because you have to take a breath in order to speak. But no one wants to actually hear that when you're hearing the story. And so I have to physically, manually go take out all my breaths. And can you imagine how many thousands of breaths there are
That's
in
a
a
lot.
book? It's crazy. So what I do is I take a gigantic breath and then I read and perform as much as I can before I have to breathe again. And so I normally can get a couple. Now, some of your sentences are really long. So sometimes I'd be
They
like,
are.
then I would go for it broke. But I do that so that I don't have to edit out too many breaths. And so
Very
it's kind of a
Faulkner of
crazy
me, I'm
thing.
sorry.
And then obviously the performing part of it is very vocally demanding. And some characters are much harder on my voice than others. Like Shelby was difficult because she's got this kind of raspy sound, because I wanted to make it sound
Mhm.
like she could be hungover or she had to drag off a cigarette or something. And so
Of
I
course you
wanted to
did.
put that texture into it, that
Mhm.
kind of little, hey, how you doing there? That sound makes it tired. And so when I'm recording in the booth, I can really do about 45 minutes tops. Now that might take me a little over an hour to do, or if I record a half an hour, it might take an hour because of pausing and breaths
Mhm.
and things. But that's about the amount of time. And so for me, when I do a book, I record every single day, 7 days a week, unless I don't feel good or something weird is happening that day. Or if I use my voice too much the day before, my voice is tired, or I have, acid reflux or something that changes the way the instrument is sounding.
Mhm.
I'll record every single day between a half hour, 45 minutes, and then I'll edit that day and I'll listen to it that day. And then I shelve it. And for it's so funny. I don't know if you're like this when you write. When I first record something, it seems terrible to me. And then I'll listen to it and I'm like, that's passable. That's probably fine. And then if I don't listen to it for 2 or 3 days, I'll come back and hear it and go, wow, that's pretty darn good. Oh, I
Yeah.
hear that emotion, or that character translates. Do you get like that? Like when it's fresh, when you just wrote it?
Yeah, and in fact, when I was working on the 3rd book of the Crescent City series, I'm working on Crescent City Soul, and I had written quite a bit of it, about a third of it, and then I shelved it entirely to
Huh.
write House of Mirrors.
Oh, no
Just put it
way.
away because House of Mirrors
Wow.
became all encompassing, it was coming out of me come hell or high water, that book was coming out, and when I was going back to Crescent City Soul, I thought, I don't know if I'm like it's the 3rd book. It's got to be really good for the people who've like hung in there with me for 2 other books, and
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it's I don't know. Is it good enough? I don't know. But then I decided, well, I'm going to go back and read it. I was like, wait, what? It's actually good. Okay. Okay.
Isn't it funny how that works? It's fun that that happens to you too.
It
That's awesome
does.
that happens to
It
you too.
absolutely does. I mean, I've tweaked a few things and kind of judged a couple of things that I felt like, but I do that anyway. I do that with anything that I'm writing. I'm going to go back in and read several times and judge and, add things. Cause sometimes, the first part of it is simply getting the story out,
Yeah.
getting out what needs to be there. And then you dress it up, you decorate it later. And, that keeps that kind of that flow. Although a
Hmm.
lot of what I write is atmospheric, and so it's like if I'm going to be setting a scene and setting the stage, kind of bringing the reader in, okay, the atmospheric parts, that's where the dressing kind of comes with the rest of the writing. But other things, in the midst of the dialogue, the midst of the kind of movement through the scene, okay, then I'll go back and dress that up later on. And so I will go back and read things, go, when I get to that, that needs something. But overall, if I shelve something for a while and I'm kind of self-doubting a lot of what I write, because I think just as artists we do, right? I mean,
Yeah, for
we
sure.
all live with imposter syndrome. It's like I'm not
Absolutely. There's no
qualified to
bigger
do this.
critic. Right. There's no harsher critic than ourselves.
Oh God, yes. God, yes. But it is kind of fun to go back and read those and go, damn, that was good.
Absolutely. It's one of my great choices to go back and listen to an audiobook I recorded like a year ago or 2 years ago. Be like, what was I? I can remember what I was going through at the time. I haven't heard the characters in a while. And it's always fun to go back. Do you go back and read your older novels and take a look and say like, oh, what was I doing then?
Sometimes
And
I
what is that?
do. I mean, and because I had to go back, and when I was, I was working on the end of Watcher, and I decided to change the end of
Oh,
Watcher.
wow. Okay.
And so to make sure that I had everything kind of flowing the way I needed to flow, I read Traveler again, and then I read Watcher again. It's like I'm going to read this like all the way through and make sure that
Smart.
this flows. But then, when I was doing House of Mirrors, and Halloween comes around, and the Crescent City books become more of a topic of conversation around Halloween because of all the magic and the witchcraft and the voodoo and all the creepy things that are in there. And so
Yes.
I'll end up going back and doing like readings from some of those books, and it's like, oh God, this was fun to write. Like, oh, that was fun. I kind of miss these people. And so I'm glad that I'm working on the third book, but I will miss them terribly when the third book is done, because that will be the end of the series. And it's like, I'm gonna miss them. I have to go back and read
So
them
this
once
is
in a while.
fascinating to me because I get attached to my characters from the audiobooks. Like I'll hear them and go, oh, there's my boys, or there's my dudes, or whatever, Sounds like you do too. You get attached to
yeah.
the characters and having them in your life and being
Yeah.
around.
They become very real people to you. I mean, when you
Oh,
spend that
yeah.
much time with them, and I like the secondary characters as much as my main characters. I like to have an interesting menagerie of people in my books. Like
Yes,
I don't
for
like
sure.
sterile supporting cast. Like the supporting cast has got to add lots of color to the set. I mean, that's just the way that it should be, and in my mind. And so I become attached not just to my main characters, where I feel like, oh, I relate to that character, and I've put a lot of my own experience into that character,
Mhm.
whatever. I mean, a lot of authors, that's a lot of what they do, and it's great, and they make great books
Yeah.
doing that. For me, it's more like, look at this crazy group of people I get to hang out with. And I miss that crazy gang when I don't have them. So it is a lot of fun to go back and kind of revisit some of those, like you said, and you kind of feel like, hey, there's my people.
Yeah, like, hey, totally. That happens to me. I'll go in and record a chapter and I haven't done a voice in a while. And so I'll listen to it and like, okay, that's that guy. And I'll come start speaking as that person. Like, oh yeah, that's right. This guy, I missed you. What's going on in your life? It's so funny. I feel ridiculous when that happens, but I'm relieved that it's happening to you too.
Yeah, it's totally happening to me all the time, because they become so much of your life. And when you've invested, I mean, 80 to 100 hours recording them, and
Yeah,
we've invested, as much time as we have in writing them,
can't even
that is
imagine.
a significant chunk of your life, and
It
your
is.
time and your thoughts and your emotions go into those fictional characters.
They do.
And for readers, it's a fleeting time, and whatever time it
Right.
is that they are reading the book or listening to the audiobook, it's that amount of time. I mean, Traveler is what, 8.5 hours long, right
Yeah.
at, a
Nine
little over
hours,
8 hours
actually.
long.
9 hours long.
So it's, that's, a reasonable amount of time for somebody to spend with those characters. We hope that they leave invested in those characters and what's going
Yeah.
on with them. But you've spent 80 to 100 hours with them. I've spent countless hours with them. So
Can't
they
even imagine.
do
Like,
become so real to us as the creators, even more than the readers, who say, oh gosh, I want more of that character. I'd love to have another book with them
mhm.
in it. And gosh, it was, it's so hard to close that book because I'm going to miss them now. They're like friends. Like, think about what it's like for us when
I
we
can't
type
even like.
the end.
How long were you working on Traveler? Just so I'll have like a for instance. Like how long was this book?
Traveler was probably a year and a half, because Traveler took a
Wow,
bit longer for me to write, and as did Watcher, because of all of the research that had to be involved.
that makes sense.
And Traveler, we're dealing with, and here's where things, for people who don't know the book,
Oh yeah.
Shelby has multiple timelines, right? She has her modern life, and then
Mhm.
she has the memories of her past lives, none of which can overlap, right?
Right.
She
Yeah, of
couldn't be
course.
born in two times at the same, even if she was in different places, she can't be born at the same time as
That
another
makes
life,
sense.
right?
Wow, I didn't even think
So
about that. Yeah.
those can't overlap. She's receiving assistance through a journal written by Elijah Faircloth, who is a Victorian English citizen, right? Our
Yeah.
dude Eli Faircloth over there. Now, Eli is in Victorian England, but he also is experiencing memories of past lives. And so he's, his experience is leading Shelby through hers. Eli's past lives cannot overlap,
Oh,
nor
wow.
can they overlap with Shelby's.
How did you track that? Just have a list of when they were alive and what you did in the scenes? Like, how do you even keep track
I
of something like
had,
that?
and I wish I had it with me. I don't know where it is. I kept a scrapbook
Oh,
of
no
like all
kidding.
of these places and all of these times, like things that were going on. So it's like this person's doing this person's doing this. They can't overlap. And like as I'm doing it, so there's a lot of research to make sure that the overlaps never happened. Because if the overlaps ever happened in Traveler between, I mean, Shelby's lives just certainly couldn't overlap anyway, because that wouldn't make sense
Right.
by, timeline. Eli, same thing. But they couldn't overlap again because of Watcher.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's
in
so
order
tricky
for
to
Watcher
navigate.
to work, they couldn't ever overlap timelines.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's fascinating. I don't know how you keep track
So,
of that.
yeah, that's why it
And for
took so
me,
long. It was a whole lot of, okay, I want to do this. Nope, that's not going to work because of this. Like, so it's like, okay, so what can I use? What will work for this that I will be happy with? And it wasn't
Mhm.
just, oh, I can do that then. I had to be happy with it because I knew whatever it was carrying forward into 2 more books, because Watcher's the sequel, but Watcher's not the
Right.
final book. There's one more. And so it had to be able to carry through all 3 books and make sense. I couldn't have anything that was going to cause a roadblock further down, which meant lots of research on the front end. Watcher took
Yeah,
a
I
little
can
less
imagine.
time to write because I knew the timeline I was working with. And when you get Watcher,
Makes
you'll
sense.
understand that now we're working with, that we've eliminated part of it and we're back in kind of this timeline, but we've got more players and more pieces moving through that. And so it had to, Traveler had to be so well researched to start with. And that one
Mhm.
is why that's why it took so much longer. I normally don't spend that much time on a book,
That
but
makes
it
sense.
it was so complex, so complex. And it's really funny because when you read it, you don't really think about that. But
No,
that's,
I
I mean, it's
mean,
not in your head going, oh, well, they can't overlap, because I never mentioned that. I mean, it's
no, you
never,
never
there's
do.
no
That never
reason for me to
even
mention
yeah.
that,
No, and
but
that never
it had
occurred
to
to
happen.
me. For me, I'm just worried about where are they and what are the accents? And the cashier is talking to someone. I'm like, is that cashier in France? Or is she in Cairo? Or is it an English thing? Like, where are they from? So I'm just looking at that stuff. Yeah, I never thought about that overlapping like rip in the
Mm-hmm.
space-time continuum that would happen if they were
Exactly.
overlapping or something. I don't know
Yep.
how that would work out.
So yeah, and so that was my rules for time travel. I mean, some people, I mean, different books, different types of time travel have different, you have your rules for how the time travel works, but it has to be a consistent rule throughout that book, throughout the series. If that's what you're going to do, that's your rule, because it keeps your reader from getting lost in the nuances of it all.
Right. It
So
sets
that
the
was my
rules in the
rule.
brain.
Lives don't overlap. I mean, she
Makes
can't be
sense.
born in 2 places at the same time, and I wanted her experience and Eli's experience to be completely separate experiences because of what happens in Watcher. And
Mhm.
so it got very complicated to do, and it took some time to do that. There were some things I wanted to include in the book. I don't remember specifically what they are now. I just remember, because it's been a few years since I was really working on all of that. But
Mhm.
I remember going, oh, dang, can't use that. Ah. But then I found something. But every time that happened, though, I found something that I liked better.
Oh,
So it was
that's
like my
great.
first instinct was like, I was glad that it didn't work, because
Mhm.
this is going to be better. This is going to be more unique. This is going to be more interesting for the reader. That was the first one might have been a safe historical point,
Oh,
an
sure.
easy one to write about because it's familiar, but that
Yeah,
didn't necessarily make it the best scene for the book.
that makes sense. So now you've been living with these characters. You spent a year and a half getting this book going. What is it like to hear it done by someone else with a different? Because we didn't collaborate that much. We talked at the very beginning, and then it was kind of like, I'm off to the races.
Yeah.
What was it like to come in just totally blind to hear it? How did that feel?
I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was just fascinating to hear what you did with the voices, and I've heard your work before, so I kind
Of
of had
course.
some expectation a little bit about how you work, how it was gonna sound, how certain characters might sound, like how the women sound when you do a female voice, and some of the
Oh, yes.
nuances that you can do with that. So I had a little bit of that kind of going in, and it was just fun to hear all of those accents coming to life and all of those locations suddenly brought to life through the
Mhm.
accents, through all of that. And I know so many of them being in one book. I know I gave you such a huge challenge. I was like, all right, let's see what he did. And it was a
Yep. I
lot
think
of
there's
fun. I mean,
solid
it
like
really was.
yeah, there's so many. I think there's 6 or 7 solid accents where there's sometimes I'll do a book where there's a character with an accent, and it's just a couple lines, but your characters go on and for chapters and
Chapters.
chapters. Like, you better learn this thing because this character is gonna stick around a while. That's so
Hmm.
fun. Something I loved about this book for me that's new is this is my first female protagonist where the female is the main character of the book. most of the books I do, you know, the men are the protagonists, the main characters, and females are kind of on the side. And so the big challenge for me is to find a good, consistent voice for Shelby that would let her interact in all these different ways, in all these different situations. And I think I found it. Were you pleased with Shelby's
I
voice? Did
was
you like
pleased
it?
with Shelby. I see her. I mean, she's from, you know, she's from New York. You know, she's got a little grit to her.
Yes.
She's I never heard her as a real soft feminine voice. You know, she's not that
No.
sweet. You know, she's got some bite to her. And
She
so I
does.
like
Yeah,
that
she's
kind of
funky.
gravelly voice that she had, a little bit of huskiness to her voice, because you know, I did see her as that, you know, just a little bit gritty. And so the voice represented that very well. And it gave her kind of it's not really brassiness. That's
Mm.
grit is really a better word, even though she's definitely ballsy in some of the things that she says and does.
Yes.
But
Oh
it's
my
not really
goodness.
that big, bold, brassy, like out to confront
No,
you kind
she's
of thing.
not diva-ish at
And
all.
that's why that gravelly kind of, you know, the raspiness kind of worked for her, because it is, she largely hungover or drunk, one or the other,
Right,
through a lot of
totally.
the book. You know, it's just, it's her life. She
Yes.
lives with a bottle of Chianti. She loves her wine. But you know, so she's young, but she's given herself kind of some vices that definitely would have added to some of that huskiness that she has. And
Yes.
she's she's you know, she's in good shape relatively, but she's not
Yeah.
like exercising and doing all of this stuff. It's just she has a busy life that keeps her moving. Is the only reason
Yeah.
why she's probably not, you know, become some sort of couch potato, because she doesn't have a whole lot of motivation other than what her job does. Her
She's
job
so
makes her do.
worldly, right? Because she's gone to all these
Yeah.
places. She's so
Yeah.
jaded because she sees the
So
tourist side,
jaded.
she sees the real side, she's got her contacts that she works with.
Mhm.
She's so, I wouldn't use the term jaded, but she's definitely worldly and knows what
Yeah.
she likes and doesn't like,
Mhm.
which is
And she
fun.
lives this weird limbo life. I mean, it's really weird to be doing what she does and be in so many places that she goes and all of this, because she's never really at home in any of them, and yet she's also not
Right.
really a tourist anymore. Like, she's some of
No,
them
it's
she's
true.
been to multiple times, or she's, you know, she's having to go do something else in this place or whatever. She's seeing it with a local, so immersed in both the local side of it, but having to do the
Mhm.
touristy side, which to her is kind of like, "Oh, yay, cliche day," you
Oh
know.
my
So
gosh,
it's like
yes, totally.
the Jamaica trip was very cliche day. Oh,
Big
yay.
time cliche. She even says that, cliche day. That's
Cliche
so
day.
funny.
I was like, here we go. So, you know, she's this weird kind of in between. And so that does give her kind of that almost jaded outlook on life, which is
Mhm.
that's why Anthony Bourdain was kind of a lot of the model for her, because he's very much the same way. It's like there is those moments of wonderment about the places that he is, but he's also seeing it with a local guide, learning the local
Mhm.
sides of things while also having to hit on the highlights of the touristy things, because that's what watchers are going to want to see on TV.
Right, of
And
course.
so I kind of thought, you know, what would he be like when the cameras aren't rolling? How
Mhm.
would he feel about where he is, and what would he be doing when the cameras aren't rolling? But she's not being videoed while she's doing all of these things. She's
Right,
writing about it after the fact. So she's not having to be on when the camera's
right.
on. So where he has to be kind of on, even when in his Anthony Bourdain kind of way, that he was always on when the camera was on. She can kind of she's more him when the cameras aren't rolling. So what's he like? And so kind of
Interesting.
taking what we know of Anthony Bourdain and kind of thinking, okay, so if he'd had to do all this, and his commentary sometimes gives you a little bit of a feel of what he might have been like when the camera wasn't rolling. And so that's how I saw her, was Anthony Bourdain when the cameras weren't rolling.
Love
How
it.
would she experience where she is? And that little bit of, I don't really fit in here, but at the same time, I'm not a tourist either. I know too
Yeah,
much to have that kind of wide-eyed innocence of the tourist that's walking around just in awe of everything. She knows too much for that. But at
yeah.
the same time, it's still not home. It's still not where she lives. She's still not a
No,
local. This is weird
that
kind
is
of
fascinating.
limbo existence for her,
Yeah, for sure. That's
which
fun.
gives her that edge. It just she's a little edgy. She's got an edge to her. And
Yeah,
anybody would,
absolutely.
because she's never comfortable anywhere either. And so she's always a little bit on guard, because she doesn't
Yes, and
know
that
who
makes
to trust,
sense because
especially
she's
as
in
things
these.
start going sideways for her. She really doesn't know who to trust. So
Oh
it's
my
like,
goodness, yeah,
okay,
you
I'm
can't tell
already edgy
anything.
because I don't belong here really, but
Yes.
also weird things are happening to me. So
Right,
now
and
I'm
who can
really
she
edgy.
tell without sounding like a maniac, a crazy
Mhm.
person? So for the people who haven't read the book, Shelby is visiting this historic site. She's a tour guide. She's writing, brochures and pictures. But when she touches, in the beginning, when she touches the place, she gets transported back in time. And then when she comes back, she's so disoriented. She's experienced maybe a horrible memory. She's not sure. And who do you tell that to?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is such a dilemma for her. But I'm just thinking, as me, who would even listen to that?
Yeah.
And she goes through that process of trying to figure out who she can trust, who she can't trust. Is she going crazy or not?
Yeah.
It's got to be really rough. It's got to be tough to experience.
I can't even imagine that. And that was part of what was important to me in making her a very real person going through these things. Is, I've read other books where people are kind of like, oh my gosh, you won't believe what just happened to me. And then they tell somebody and they believe them. And I'm going, first of all, I wouldn't say a word. People are going to think I have lost my mind. And then I'm going to think I've lost my mind. And then, I mean, let's hope it doesn't happen again. So it was so much of what would I do?
Right. Yes, of course.
Nope. I can't tell anybody that. They're going to think I'm crazy. I'm going to end up in some sanitarium somewhere. They're going to lock me away. It's going to be terrible. Or people are going to think, yeah, well, you're nuts. And then there goes my guide, because he doesn't want to, take the crazy person around Rome.
Right. Anymore. And the career ramifications of that too. Yeah. Because what if the guide just thinks she's a kook, doesn't want to work with her anymore, and that's her job in the line, and who's she going to go with next time she's in Rome or wherever?
Like, exactly. There were too many layers to that of what if you're crazy? And I mean, because that doesn't happen to people, right? And that was the whole thing. We are living in a world. I mean, and the book is set in a world where time travel doesn't happen to people. It's not real. Right, Like, this is not what we do. We don't get pulled into past lives. Your memories don't come back to get you. Gods and goddesses don't tell you that they screwed up big time and you got to fix it for them.
Right? I never hear that. This has not happened in my life.
It's not happened to me either. And if it did, then I would doubt me, not the experience.
Right?
I'm not going to go, oh, this has happened and now I must deal with this and, go on some great journey of self-discovery.
Here's a prescription for some Xanax. Please take it and get back to me.
Wow. Bring me my pills and my wine. We're going to take a long nap because this did not happen.
This is not what we're living for.
Wake me up in 3 days when I can pretend none of that happened. So I mean, it was very much, what would a actual person do, an average actual person do if that happened to them? And that was, to me, the only way to deal with this and make it fun for the reader, because it's not, I love fantasy things where fantasy things happen, and it's a fantasy world and those things happen. But the world itself in this book was just modern day everywhere. There was nothing fantastic about this world except what was happening to Shelby. Yes. And so if you're the only one in the world of this book where it's happening, then you're gonna feel really weird about it.
Yeah. I like in this book, you capture a lot of those real world moments. I think I mentioned this to you when we had a phone call about how you'll bring up the smallest details that you would notice in real life. And I reference, like, you get a drink in an airplane and they put all this ice in it and you're like, too much ice. And that happens. And why is that? Yeah. Or when you're like, oh, and the view of Greece was beautiful through the grimy window because some kid probably got it all sticky and covered it, because, it's real life. This is what happens. Or I'm on a train and you hear the sound as your thigh comes off the leather that's from the 70s. I love all the minutia that you put in there to really bring the locations to life. Now, are you like that as a person? Do you notice those things when you're somewhere? Or is that just something you put in this book?
No, I notice those things and it's terrible. I do. I notice those things. And I think that's why they're in the book. Because, I've had that moment on an airplane where I'm just trying to drink my ginger ale. Thank you very much for my ginger ale. That's, 3 drips of ginger ale in a glass of
on your nose
ice cube. Yes. Drinking. And you go to drink it, all of a sudden the ice cubes shift and now you're a mess and you're on a plane. Like, that's happened to me. So, and I wanted her, because she's so out of place in everything, all of the little irritations, because this is to her, the whole situation is a bother, because this is so not what she wants to do. So it was important for me to let her be annoyed by the little things. And it's not like major annoyance. Like she doesn't comment on, oh my gosh, they put too much ice
No,
in my
not at
drink.
all.
That's
Not
the
at all.
narrator's thing. It's just
Yeah.
basically, this is an annoyance. We've all felt this annoyance. She's gonna drink her rum and Coke in the glass with too much ice. And that was it. That's the only mention of it. But
Yeah.
we all know that. We all know the annoyance there. And we all know that we really wish there was more rum and Coke in that glass than there was
Yes,
ice.
absolutely.
And so even just the kind of in passing moment kind of comments from the narrator, and because the narrator has a voice, the narrator is
Yeah.
not that totally neutral voice, even in
Right.
third person, it lets that annoyance come through
It does.
without having to have Shelby be annoyed.
Yes,
You
no,
know,
that makes perfect sense.
then
And as
she's
a
not so
narrator, I love
unlikable because you don't want somebody who's just going to bitch about everything. I mean, let
right,
the
and they
narrator
make the
bitch
character
about
very
some of it a little bit.
No, that's a fascinating choice. So you could put that kind of that negativity onto the narrator and not onto Shelby
Yeah.
or anything. That's a really fascinating approach. I like that as an audiobook narrator because it gave me the chance to put some emotion or some annoyance or excitement. It gave me a chance to be expressive during what typically is a very factual part of the book.
Yeah.
That was fun.
I like at the very beginning where we're describing the shack, the little mountain shack she's in Jamaica,
Mhm.
and the funhouse floor, because the
Oh,
tiles are all
yes.
warpy and
And
weird,
like
and
the
she's hungover and
threadboard
she's
and like
trying
the
to get to the
yeah.
window, and it's like, the funhouse floor, and we've got the threadbare blanket,
Threadbare
12 threads,
blanket, and then the
and then
curtain that's probably
the
related
curtain.
because it's, like, barely blocking the
Yep.
sun. But those are the
Like,
details you would notice in real life. If you were there, you would see this, you would notice that. I
mhm.
love that you brought that kind of detail work into this book.
Yeah,
It's
it made it
fun.
more fun to describe that scene without having to say, the blanket was all worn and thin." Like, no, the blanket that had 12 threads and the
Right?
curtain that was a close relative of the blanket. I didn't have to talk about how worn out the curtains were. We know how worn out the blanket was. And it
Right?
was always
Totally.
this kind of sarcasm, and, there was a lot of there was a lot of, hyperbole, and everything was a little exaggerated with the narrative, like the 12 threads in the blanket. Well, we know
Right,
this
totally,
didn't
of
have
course.
12 threads, but it just this real thin, kind of gauzy blanket is useless. Why do you need a blanket on the bed in Jamaica anyway? Like,
Right? What's that
there's
for?
so much wrong with that. Why was that blanket there long enough to be worn out in Jamaica? Like, there's so much about that blanket we could talk about, but I
That's
just
so
mentioned that it
funny.
has 12 threads. That's it. But those kinds of things were fun for me because that's the kind of stuff too that gave the narrator the snark that the narrator needed
Mhm.
to have that
Yeah.
voice. And so, I mean, Shelby's snarky, and Shelby will say some, sassy things to different people, especially to the gods who she,
Yes.
think they're in control. But allowing the narrator to be just as snarky was a lot of fun.
It was fun to be the narrator who's snarky.
I love that. I'm so glad that was fun for you to actually do that,
Oh, yeah, that
as
was really
opposed to
fun.
like, what is she doing with this narrator? Why is the
No, because it's
narrator
very
talking?
different than what I normally get to do in terms of third person narrating. So I love first person because I can get those emotions and how do I react and how do I feel? And in third person, you don't get that. But
Mm-mm.
this one gave me a chance to kind of bring some of that into it, which is really cool. That was fun.
It was a very different thing for me to write too, because I've not Traveler is the only, Traveler was the only one that I've written with a narrator with a personality. And I always write in third
Mhm.
person. I can't stand to write in first person. I can't stand to write in person present tense either. I can't
Mhm.
stand that. And I have a hard time. It takes me a while to really get into a book that is first person present tense. I'm running this way. Like there are good books that are written that way, and lots of people like that, and I
Yeah,
have read books that I have enjoyed that way, but it takes me a while to get over it to enjoy the
makes sense.
book, I guess is what I'm saying, because it's not my preference to
Mhm.
read. Um,
Totally.
I much prefer past tense, and I much prefer third person past tense. And so that's what I write. But again, like you said, when you do that, it can be very sterile. And in some
Mhm. Yeah,
cases, a lot of times it is simply setting the scene, saying what things are people are doing. I think that's why I like to write
yeah.
so atmospheric when I do that, because it allows the
Mhm.
setting to become a character, which gives some
Yes, that's
emotion and
true.
gives some movement and some things to the narration, as opposed to just it was, this guy was blue. You know,
Yeah, no,
giving that
absolutely.
some depth, helps me to keep that third person past tense narration from being just so bland. But Traveler, because it was kind of like I kind of saw it as like an episode. Like I go back to Anthony Bourdain all the time, and of course, I adored him. I mean, he was one of my favorite people to watch, and so it was very much like Shelby is Anthony Bourdain on camera, and the narrator Shelby is Anthony Bourdain's voice talking about what he's doing.
That's terrific.
It's the audio that goes with the video part. It's the narration that goes over his stuff. So it's like the two of them. Even though they're both Anthony Bourdain on his stuff, I made them separate people. And it's it's me being Anthony Bourdain-ish, snarky-ish, narrating whatever Shelby's doing, and Shelby's not having it either. And so it's like, I don't know what we're doing here, but this is not what I intended my life to be. But it does. I love that too, that it changes from that kind of general snark at the beginning to some more poignant things where even the narration becomes a bit more emotional.
It does.
As she's going through some of these things that are very difficult to see. I mean, some of her past lives were just horrific.
Yes, they were.
Terrible things that she had to witness again. She already lived through them. Now she's witnessing them again. And the narrator, because it is so much like an actual person doing the talking, the narrator then can shift and respond appropriately. He's not, this narrator's not going to be just so super snarky through something when she's coming out of a really difficult vision.
No.
The emotion changes even with the narration, which was fun to do, to kind of make sure that I guess seeing the narrator as an actual person talking, as opposed to this kind of voice, voice from God up here who's telling you what's going on. It was more as if that was a character that was involved, even though they're not technically a character. It was more making that narration human as opposed to omnipotent or omniscient up there.
I like that your narrator has that expressive emotion, but they also have really good insight into the characters themselves. There's lots of times where the narrator will comment on something that somebody does about how that's helping them grow as a person, or she's really scared but won't admit it to herself. That kind of insight is really fun. I like the narrator for that, because that's a lot more than you normally get in a third person narration. There's usually no summation or judgment or anything like that. It's just factual details. And in this case, the narrator actually can tell, like, they have a good idea of who this person is and what their potential could be. I'm interested to see where this goes, see if that narrator turns into anybody or what's happening there. It's so fun.
So far, through Watcher, the narrator just simply is there, but still passing judgment and, commenting on things and, and Watcher is a lot of fun too. Watcher, again, it's an adventure. Now Watcher becomes, Traveler is time travel through basically experiencing past lives again. So it's a past life regression kind of a thing. Watcher is time travel. We are time hopping
in live. They're going to go back in time and experience it in real time. Where can they have that changes? Because then in Traveler, all they can do is be a passenger. They can just watch it. They can interact to an extent, but they can't really change anything. And if they move their hand off the wall, poof, they're back in modern times.
Right.
So
they're interacting with the time, but they don't have the ability to change too much. They are there for a singular purpose, and that one reason that they are in each time place, and the purpose doesn't change. They are there for the same purpose throughout, but they're having to jump repeatedly. And so it's like it's a quest. I mean, they're after somebody. Like they've got to get the person, and they're jumping through different times to on this chase. It's basically it's a chase scene. Basically, the whole book is a great big chase scene. They have to figure out who they're chasing and why, and then they're off to the races.
Nice.
And so the chase itself is the time jumping, but because they're there for one reason only, and it's a chase, they're not there to impact events that they're witnessing, because the event itself is not why they're there. They happen to be in it, but that's not why they're there.
That makes sense.
And so they're not changing history. They're not changing time, because nothing that they're going to do would change that major event that's going on around them. They're just there looking for a needle in a haystack, and then off they go again. So nothing that's going to be impactful on history itself, at least in Watcher.
That's all we know of yet. Now, when does Watcher come out?
It comes out, it's slated for November 30th. So the end of November. So right around the holidays, we will have Watcher as our our big adventure coming up. I love it. Laura Kemp says it's like Indiana Jones meets Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Like,
It's totally that. It's like a sci-fi. I tell my friends, they're like, "What are you recording?" I'm like, "It's a sci-fi romance. It's really time travel, time hopping, but there's romance happening, but it's not stereotypical cheesy romance. It's more realistic about people in the situation, getting to know themselves better, obviously getting to know each other better, eventually recognizing that they were already in love, but not, there's never a cheesy moment where that happens. It's really nice. It feels so organic that it's kind of, the situations kind of push them and pressure them into coming to these realizations. They're shaped by the events in their environment, this romance.
I don't do mushy and I don't do sex scenes. And so what I do is a lot of situational relationship and innuendo.
Oh,
And
yes.
so, that to me, kind of the double entendre and the, read between the lines kind of things that imagine your own scenes behind the closed doors. Don't write smut.
Like that. Because I hate hearing you do romance scenes. Oh my goodness. I've done romance scenes in books. It's the worst thing ever, everybody, because it's so awful because I have to record it. So first it feels good because I'm trying to feel those feelings and act it out. And I get that little brief moment of like, oh, I get that hit of dopamine of like doing this thing. And then I have to listen to me. Have you ever recorded yourself saying sweet nothings to somebody? It's horrifying.
Oh,
I listen to me and I'm like, do I really sound like that? Oh my God. and then not only do I whisper the sweet nothings, then I play the girl whispering them back to me. It's horrible. And so I'm so relieved when there's no real hot and heavy like romance scenes, because that means I don't have to listen to myself do it.
Oh God, that's hysterical. I never thought about it from your side of things,
Oh
but I'm doubly glad then that I didn't do that.
When I listen to my books and I get to a romantic chapter, I'm like, skip, because I don't want to think about it, because it'll come to my head. I'll be on a date or something like, hey, what? Oh my gosh, I'm like, this book, I did this thing. I'm like, I can't do, like, it's so funny.
It's like those are the phrases you think you have to use because you've said
oh my goodness, I just don't want to hear it. I'm like, is that my pillow talk? That is really alarming.
Oh God, yeah. So see, I can't write that any more than you can record that. So that's why my books.
That is so funny. Oh, we got a little lag here.
Oh, hang on. Oh, there we go.
There we go. We're back to it.
I don't know what happened there.
Yes, but, it's always a risk for me on a book like this where I know there's some romance involved because I don't read ahead. So I'm like, oh boy, here we go. What are we doing?
Oh no, they seem to be flirting and falling in love. And it's like, no, we have the moment where you know something's going to happen, and then it's the next morning.
Yeah, so you fill in the blanks on your own, which I really like.
I don't need to tell you what happens after moments like that. If you don't know, then you need to get out more.
My next book that has a bunch of romance in it, I'm going to hire an editor so I don't have to hear it.
Yep, there you go. Somebody else get out all the breaths.
You don't want to listen to this in 2 years and I haven't heard it, and then it'll sound all right to me. It's so funny.
Oh God, I never even thought about that. You actually having to play both parts.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're so handsome. So are you. I love you. I love you. Like, it's so funny. Feels like a crazy person.
That might be the funniest thing that we have talked about so far. Oh my gosh. Well, we've gone like it's been an hour and 20 minutes. Look at us.
Oh
go.
wow, it's been so much fun.
I know it has. So guys, what we've been talking about all this time is Traveler. And if you've not read Traveler, well, you have an option now. Instead of actually picking up the book to read it, you can listen to the fabulous Mike Eberhardt do all of these amazing voices for all of these great characters that we've had a great time. I had a great time creating and writing, and Mike had a great time bringing to life with all of the many, many accents. I mean, we've been everywhere in this book, from Jamaica to Greece to Egypt to, well, we had an Englishman in there,
Spain,
France, Spain, so many places all over. Malta. I mean, we've been everywhere. everywhere. And it has been such fun listening to you bring all of those accents and all of those characters to life. And I know it was a challenge for you to have so many in one book for such a sustained amount of time. And I guess that's the other
Yes.
thing. And like you said, that passing comment from somebody, but this is
Right.
chapters of that accent.
Yeah. It's really easy to phonetically spell out one sentence in an accent, but to do it for paragraphs at a time or chapter after chapter, that's the
And then
challenge.
several accents, different accents, so the same characters having a conversation. I mean, when they were in France, it
Oh,
was
yeah.
Shelby with her American accent, Benny's Roman, and Giles Parisian. It's like,
Yeah, his Paris accent. And then
do, do,
wherever we
do.
are, like all the people that are not
Mhm.
part of the main story, the shopkeepers, the restaurateur, the bartenders, the taxi person,
Yep.
they all live there. And you're like, do they have a French accent? Do they have any? What are they?
Who
What do they
are
got?
they?
Yeah, it's so
Where are
funny.
we?
It's fun.
Yep. But it has been such fun talking about how you created these. I will never listen to Apollo the Same without imagining the baby carrot in your teeth. That is great. And I'm never going to be able to listen to a romantic scene in an audiobook without laughing now because
So
all I can
funny.
think about is you having to romance yourself.
Well, this was a
Hysterical.
genuine pleasure to talk. Thank you for hosting this and for writing Traveler and
So
inviting me to be a part of it. It's such a thrill to bring your characters to life. It's such a privilege, and I'm just always appreciative of it. It's a real joy in my life. So thank you for that.
well, you are most welcome. And thank you so much for doing such a fabulous job. And folks, please, please go check out Mike's work on any of the things that he has done. If Traveler is not the book for you, if this is not the genre that you enjoy, then I guarantee you that Mike has recorded something in some genre that you will find a great listen as you're driving around. Like I did, take Mike with you. Let Mike tell you stories
Please
while you
do.
run errands. That's what I do.
Absolutely. You can go to my website, superfunstudios.com, and I've got all my audiobooks listed there. You can hear the first chapter of each one, so you can find one that you like.
Absolutely. And Traveler's got a first chapter there too. So give it a listen. You will
Yes.
enjoy it. I promise you. For those of you who stuck around and you left comments, thank you so much, Deborah. We appreciate the compliment there. And we appreciate you guys hanging out with us. If you are watching this on a replay, leave some comments anywhere that this is posted. We will see those. I will see those especially, or tag Mike in it. And we'll get back to you on any questions that you might have. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. This has sure been a lot of fun. And I know Mike and I have enjoyed having you. So thanks so much. And we will talk to you soon. We're going to end this live broadcast right now.
Sounds good. Goodbye.